Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar, Introduction to Node-RED. My name is Ian Scarrett. I'm the head of marketing at FlowForge, and welcome everyone to this session today. Actually, to get started, I encourage everyone to kind of just say where you're from, where you're joining us from. I know we have a global audience, and it's always nice to see where people are calling in from. Couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. The webinar will be recorded. We will send you a link to the recording after the webinar is finished. So if you want to share it with people, with your colleagues, or just kind of use it as a resource later, it certainly will be available. We also will have plenty of time at the end of the presentation. There's going to be a kind of presentation and a live demo. If you want to put your questions in, use the Q&A pod at the bottom of the screen. You should be able to find it there. That's kind of the easiest way for us to kind of go through all the different questions that we have. All right. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Rob Marcer, who's the FlowForge developer advocate. So Rob, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. It's the first time I've done one of these webinars, so hopefully I get this all right. I know what I'm doing. Please forgive me if I'm not as slick as I possibly could be. I will do my best. So, hi, I'm Rob Marcer. I'm a developer educator at FlowForge. So a bit of my history with Node-RED. So I discovered Node-RED during the COVID-19 pandemic. At the time, working in the UK, a lot of us had a lot of time to kill because a lot of businesses closed down for a period of time. So I decided to look into Node-RED after one of my colleagues recommended it. I then decided to automate everything in my house as a first sort of hobbyist project. So I automated my heating and lighting systems and turning on TVs, those sorts of things. Really good way to get started with Node-RED and learn its capabilities. As the pandemic started to recede in the UK, I took that knowledge back to my day job, and we looked at ways that we could make use of Node-RED to help the business achieve its goals. I then worked on implementing an infrastructure and DevOps so that we could use Node-RED in production. So it was highly available and reliable. And so our development team could interact with that. Once that was all in place, we then built over 20 commercial integrations in Node-RED. So these would be linking various online services related to retail and restaurants. So linking customer relationship management software together to till systems, business intelligence, e-commerce, stuff like that. I was very happy to know, I'd been following FlowForge for a while. I was very happy to see a role came up with FlowForge in 2022, the role of developer educator. So I interviewed for that, and I very happily got the job because I enjoy spreading awareness of Node-RED. So, you know, I really enjoy helping people understand how to use it and hopefully helping them get value from it. So that's a bit about me. And okay, so a bit about what Node-RED is. So Node-RED is a visual programming interface. It also has the runtime built in. So you can both write your code, or as we describe it, flows, as well as actually run those flows and see what the outcome would be, all within that same piece of software. Node-RED was started in 2013 by one of my colleagues, Nick O'Leary, and another gentleman called Dave Conway-Jones, who were both working at IBM at the time. IBM very quickly realized and supported that it'd be great to make Node-RED an open source project. So that happened the same year. Then Node-RED really started to benefit from contributions from the community to the direction of its development. Node-RED is also one of the founding projects of the OpenJS Foundation, which was founded in 2016. So where are people using Node-RED? So as I mentioned a little while ago, it's used in people's homes. There is a huge community of hobbyist people, quite often running Node-RED on Raspberry Pis to automate lots and lots of things within their homes. I've mentioned some obvious ones, but I've seen things like, say, controlling garage doors, watering plants, feeding animals. There's so many things that people have thought up to use Node-RED to automate that sort of Internet of Things for the home. But it's also used in manufacturing extensively. This is quite often to manage and monitor machinery within a factory, quite, for instance, to collect telemetry from those devices, so to understand maybe if something's running a little bit slower than it should be, or maybe it's running a little bit hotter than it should be, to alert where something needs to be resolved, and also to collate that information so it can be reviewed at a later date. Node-RED is also used quite a lot in small businesses to democratize coding. And what I mean by that is that Node-RED makes it really easy for people who've never coded before to start to automate tasks. So something that, whereas traditionally in small businesses, maybe a manager might have had to have gone to a developer and said, oh, I can see a way to save us some time. Can you work on developing this? It now makes it possible for that manager themselves to actually write basic code or flows to save themselves time, maybe by entirely automating a task they used to do manually. So it makes it really easy for people without a developer background, to work on those sorts of things. It's also used a lot in the cloud. So I mentioned what I'd done at my previous employer to link applications together. So it's quite a good way to take information from API A, link that to information from API B, and then push it into a third system, for instance, for customer databases. It's also used in thousands of other places. If you read about the way in which, interesting ways that people are using Node-RED, there's always new stuff coming up. A couple of recent examples that I've seen is using it to monitor for forest fires. So having devices that can be placed around a forest, monitor for changing air quality and spikes in temperature, and then all of those devices communicate through a mesh network back to a central system that then hopefully could alert the relevant emergency services quickly. Another great example I saw was writing the software to run escape rooms. So creating something that easily allows people to program the different interactions for escape rooms within Node-RED. So there's just so many great new ways that people are finding to use Node-RED every day. So some of the key concepts of Node-RED. So first of all, here we have the editor. So this is how it looks normally, and this is just showing some of the key elements of the interface. So first of all, we have the workspace here. So this is where you drag in and design your flows. We have the palette, this section on the left. These are pre-built pieces of functionality that you can use in your flows. Node-RED by default has a good selection of those, but there are also ones that are developed by the community, which I'll cover in a little while. Over on the right-hand side, we have the sidebar. This provides various different information depending on what you're doing. It can provide debug information. It can provide documentation on how to use these nodes. And in some cases, it will also provide configuration options for the nodes that you're using. And then the final section is the header up at the top. This provides, through this burger menu here, access to further options about more detailed control of Node-RED, for instance, importing custom nodes, and also the deploy button. So I'll come to this in a second, a little bit more detail, but when you're writing flows in Node-RED, they aren't actually running as you see them on screen until you deploy them. So you can make changes, and then once you're happy with those changes, you can press deploy, and that's what will actually start being run within the runtime. Okay, so first of all, a very simple flow and some key concepts shown within this flow. So here we have an inject node, and we have a debug node, and we have a wire joining them together. So inject sends in a payload of information, or it can potentially be a blank payload, either based on time triggers, so once a minute, once a second, once an hour, or when somebody manually presses this button here. Debug reads out the information that's being passed in. So in this case, this would be a timestamp that's getting set through here, and it allows you to view the information as it passes through your flow. So here, for instance, we can see that this timestamp is sent through to debug, and then it has appeared on this side here. That's, I think, millisecond Unix time. So yeah, it's a way for, sorry, within this side panel here, which is the debug panel, it's a way for, as you're building flows, to, if you're like, oh, I'm not quite sure what's passing through that particular wire, you can add on one of these debug nodes and then see exactly what's going on. I mentioned a minute ago, deploy. So as we are working on flows and editing things, until such time as we deploy that code, the older version, the previous version from when you last deployed will still be running. When you deploy, it overwrites the entire application, or subject to what you choose here, and then that new version starts working. I'm going to go into more detail about the other ways to deploy later. Another key concept that I've mentioned, and one that makes Node-RED really, really valuable, is the custom nodes that the community creates. So here are the current most popular custom nodes that have been created. These are, in some cases, quite simple bits of functionality, and some cases, very complex pieces of functionality, which you can add into your flows. So ones that stand out to me is this allows you to easily send an email from a flow, rather than trying to think about how to write your own system and to interact with SMTP servers for email. It's already dealt with in here, so that makes it really easy to send emails if you need to. Another one, and the one we've got highlighted here, which we're going to look at a little bit later, is dashboard. So dashboard allows you to build interfaces within Node-RED, which might show graphical information, text information, and also allows users of those interfaces to trigger flows or interact with flows by pressing buttons. So it might be that they've actually started something running by pressing a button. If you click it, so these are all from the Node-RED website, and if you click into any one of these, you get one of these views with a lot more detail, information about how often it's being updated, and yeah, how many people. So this one here has been downloaded when I took this screenshot nearly 29,000 times in 1 week. So that's quite a popular one. So it just allows you to understand a little bit more about what the custom nodes do. Okay, fine. And I haven't skipped. I thought I'd missed a slide there, but I haven't. So the next thing is we're going to run through building some stuff. So I'm going to just jump through into Node-RED, if I can find the right button to do that. There we go, cool. Just one thing here, and we'll come back to this a little bit later. So we're running Node-RED here within FlowForge. FlowForge is the company I work for. In case you don't know, provide cloud-based hosting and management tools around running Node-RED. So it's a really easy way for you, if you want to try out some of the things that I'm going to go over today, or try out anything else, to get an instance of Node-RED that you can work with. We do have a free trial, so you can use that for 30 days and test out some of the things that you're learning about. Okay, cool. So the first thing I'm going to look at is the 4 most important nodes, and they are inject, debug, switch, and change. Okay, so we covered a little bit that inject sends information, and debug shows it on the debug panel. So what I'm going to do is wire those two together. I'm going to deploy this. And when I run this, we're going to see, as in my screenshot a few minutes ago, we're getting this here in the debug. That's a Unix timestamp. So yeah, that's not really done anything all that useful, but hopefully that shows how wiring things together, we can send information through to the debug. If I want to look at more options for any of these nodes, the way to do that is to double click on them. So double left click. So that then brings this up. So what this is showing is what this this inject node is actually outputting. So at the moment it's saying message payload to be timestamped. This message topic thing underneath, let's ignore that for now. It's not really important. So I'm just going to try changing this to something else. So rather than sending in a timestamp that updates every time we click the button, so I'm sorry, I have to redeploy. So you note every time I click that button, the timestamp is changing. But rather than sending through that, let's just send through a string text. So as is tradition, that would be hello world. And so if I now deploy that, I should now see that rather than getting the timestamp, I'm getting hello world through. One useful thing to know is in this debug menu, sometimes you can end up with lots and lots of values. And let's say if you've fixed a bug within a flow and then you want to deploy and then try checking things again, you can use this button here just to clear out all of these messages. So now, yeah, if I just deployed something, I've hidden the other ones, and I know, yeah, definitely every time I've run this, I've just got hello world out. So that sounds like a good thing. What I'll now just do is drop in a second inject, and I'm going to make this say something else. Okay, so I'm going to wire this up in the same way, link it up to there. deploy this. So what we should now see is when I run this top one, we get hello world coming out of this debug and showing here. And when I click the second one, I should get something else. So this is, I suppose, just showing that, yeah, different strings could be sent through or different values and how they would appear in the debug. The next thing I'm going to look at is switch. So what switch allows you to do is to evaluate the content of a payload and then send the payload off into one or more different directions based on its content. So to do that, first of all, I'm going to drag this out. If I'm going to drag this out, you see when I hover over there, that has gone not a solid line anymore. That basically means when I let go of that, it's automatically wired it in between those two. So it can just saves you a bit of time rather than having to delete these wires, you know, like, so otherwise you would have done that and that, and wired that up, then wired that up. It just saves you a bit of time being able to drag it onto the top. I'm also going to delete that wire and wire that in. So both of these are going to come through this switch. So let's double click on this switch to have a look at what we can do with it. So in here, we're basically saying message property, does it equal something? We have all different sort of operators, not equal, less than, etc., etc. So what I'm going to do here is, does message.payload equal hello world? Okay, and then I'm going to add an otherwise first, so anything that doesn't match that. Okay, so I'm going to press done. What we'll now see is we've got two outputs on here. So the equals hello world is going to come out this way, and the otherwise is going to come out the lower way. One best practice here, or something that I think is a really good idea, to make this easier to read your flows, name this as a question where the positive answer will be the top path. So let me actually show that. Maybe that'll make sense. So does payload equal hello world ? Okay, so now when I look at that, if the answer to that is yes, it will go out the top, whereas otherwise it will go out the bottom. It just makes it quite a bit easier for you or someone else to read your flows. I've just dropped in another debug. So now we have the two different paths come through here, evaluate, go out the other side. So let's give that a test. Okay, so if I run hello world, okay, we can see that hello world landed somewhere, but it's not immediately obvious. Well, you kind of can see because it's called debug one, as is that one. But it's not immediately obvious, perhaps, where that came from. So one good thing you can do is if you hover over here, I don't know if everyone can see the orange checks around that. So that shows you which debug node that information came from. So that's great. That's worked properly. Okay, so now we'll try something else. And that should come from the bottom one, which it does. So both of these strings have been passed into this switch. We've evaluated the content of the payload and either sent it on down one path or another. This would be quite often triggering, you know, some significant different functionality. I appreciate in this case, it's just outputting to a debug, but hopefully still that's useful for people. It demonstrates how it could be used. So the fourth key node that you will, I would imagine, use a lot, certainly I do, is the change node. So what this allows us to do is to replace one value with another. So I'm going to drop it on here as we did previously, and we can see that's just wired that in automatically, which is great. So what I'm going to do down here is I'm going to set message payload to be another, I could type another value. So even though this is going to pass something else through here, come out here, it's then going to replace it with another value, which is what we should see out of this debug. Sometimes it's useful just to see, oh, what's actually going on in this flow, to drop a debug in further sort of back towards the start, so to speak. So that one there should pick up something else because it flows through here. Then that should replace something else with another value that should come out of this debug here. So did I do that all correctly? I did, yes. So something else comes through there, but then we've replaced it with another value. This is a very simple example because we're just setting it with replacing the string, but we could potentially be loading in another value which is stored rather than that. So maybe I shouldn't have used the name another value. Maybe that makes it confusing, but it could be programmatically loading in a numerical value that's stored somewhere else in the flow, for instance. So, and we'll look at one of those examples a little bit later. Okay, great. So, So I'm just checking I've not missed anything, and I have not. Okay, great. So next thing that would be good to look at is the custom nodes that we mentioned. So we have various functionality in here by default, but sometimes there's something you want to do which isn't included. So to get to the custom nodes, I'm going to go to the burger menu and then into manage palette. Then I'm going to go to install, and this is where I can search. So for this example, I'm going to pull in a random number generator. So I've typed in random. First thing you will see is there are a lot of different matches. I think in a total of 22 custom nodes include the term random. Sometimes someone may have said, oh, this is a really good custom node that you should use. So sometimes it'll be based on recommendation, which can make it easier. Sometimes you might want to evaluate which one of these is the right one for me to use. So in this case, I think this one is right for me. So a node-red node that when triggered generates a random number between two values. I'm pretty sure that's the right thing for me. I could also, though, if I click on this link here, this will bring me to the full page on the Node-RED website, which gives me significantly more information about how it works, links through to GitHub and NPM. So I can, if it's this is quite a simple custom node, but if it's something more complicated, you may want to read a bit more about exactly what it does. So, but for me, this is the right one. So I'll just drop back onto here and install it. So, and then click install there. Depending on the complexity of the custom node, this can take any time from a second or so through to 30 seconds or so. So whilst that's loading, I'm just going to drop, it's just come in. I'm going to drop in the other things I need for this demo, which is an inject and a debug. But what I should see down here now is random. So that's the new custom node that I just loaded in. If I want to read about this without having to drop out of Node-RED, so if I'm just trying to remind myself exactly how it works and I don't want to have to open up another window to do that, I can select it. And then in this side panel here, if you select this icon, help, you get information about how that custom node works, and also the ones which are included by default in Node-RED. So sometimes that can just help if you're just working on, say, one screen on a laptop. It can make it a bit easier to remind yourself exactly how something works. So I'm going to wire this up. So link that to there and that to there. This is going to generate the payload. So I don't need anything to be injected in here other than a request to start the flow. So this time I'm going to delete both of those. And then I'm just going to open this up to see if there's anything to configure. There is, but yes, I want a whole number integer. Great. Between 1 and 10. That's all fine. I'm going to deploy that. Go to debug, clear it all down. So what we should get now every time I click this is a random number between 1 and 10, which is working, which is great. Okay. Another and like the most popular custom node out there is something called dashboard, which I'm now going to demonstrate. I mentioned it in the slides at the start. It allows you to easily build dashboards of graphs and data and make some of that interactive as well. So I'm going to install that. This will take a little bit longer because you will see when it loads in, it actually adds about 20 custom nodes into Node-RED. What I'm first of all going to do with this is, so what we've created here, I'm going to put that functionality, so this random number generator, within a dashboard that can be accessed through a web page. So depending on where you're using Node-RED, that can be actually publicly available, as in anyone on the internet can access it, or maybe it's just within a VPN or a network within an office. So when we're working on FlowForge, we can actually just make these things publicly available quite easily. So, okay, so that's now loaded in. I can see here all the elements that have come from dashboard. So what I want is a button. And I want a text field, okay? And then I'm going to wire those into the button. It's going to come in the same place as inject and trigger this random number generator. Then it's going to go out to this text field. We've got these red markers on each of these. What that's basically saying is we need to complete some configuration before we deploy the changes we've made. Otherwise, potentially, this isn't going to work properly. So I'm not going to talk too much detail about what I'm doing right now to get rid of those, other than say, when you're creating dashboards, you create one or more pages. And And I'm going to put everything I'm demonstrating on one page, but if I wanted to split them up into multiple pages, I might go through this configuration. I might give them different names, but all I'm going to do is basically create a new dashboard group like that, add, done. And if you did exactly the same things, press the edit button twice and then save all of that, it just creates a default page. So, and then now if I go into text, I can just press done, and these elements are both going to be on the same page. Okay, so what I can do now is deploy that. So how can I access this? So on pretty much anywhere I have ever used Node-RED, it's as simple as grabbing everything up to that /. So before where it's got the hashtag flow, I'm going to open up a new window and then /UI, and there we go. So this has been run from the flow that we were just putting together in Node-RED. So this button should trigger a random number generator, so 7, 6, 8, etc. If I drop back into Node-RED, we can see, so this is, it's not that that's a separate copy, it's running this exact same flow, but now we're triggering it from the user interface rather than from within Node-RED. So other things I might want to do, I'd rather change the button name and the description of the random number to something a little bit more, well, descriptive. I'd also like to make it so the button sits above where the random number appears. So first thing I'm going to do is just make these a bit more descriptive. So I've double clicked on that and I'm going to call it random number, please. I'm going to double click on to the text field and your random number was. Okay. And then the other thing I said I wanted to do was change the order of the elements. So if I pull this out a little bit, when we install dashboard, we got another icon up here, dashboard. So if I click on that, this allows me to change various things about the dashboard that I'm creating. In this case, I want to change the order. So if in here, I can move, for instance, one below the other and then deploy that, we should now see that the random number button is now got the text I've just put in, and it will still do the same stuff. Okay, so let's then take that up to the next level. So rather than just having a text output, let's add a gauge onto it. So one of the elements within dashboard is gauge. There we go there. Okay, so I can drop that in. I need to open it up and then save it so that it's part of the same canvas as these other items. I'm also just going to check some of the configuration. So the random number generator was generating a number between 1 and 10, not 0 and 10. So I'm just going to change that. It just means the position of the needle will match up and make sense in the context of that range. So, but otherwise, I think that's all fine. Press done and deploy. And what we should now see is we also have a gauge. So in each time we press that, it's going to move the needle to the relevant place on there. Okay, great. I'm not necessarily going to want to sit and click this button over and over again. So it might be quite nice if I could make this where someone isn't clicking the button, it just automatically once a second generates a new random number and shows that. So I'm going to go into this inject node here, and we have various options at the bottom to make this inject automatically. So we've got interval between times and at a specific time. So I just want interval. It's already on 1 second, so that's fine. So when I press done and deploy, what we will see now is every second that will trigger that flow and therefore update the gauge and the text. I can still also press this manically, but yeah, you know, so it's not that it's disabled that other way to trigger the flow. So you can have more than one way to trigger the flow, but when just left alone, this will now keep on updating. That, however, can be a little bit annoying when you're looking at your debug. So if you've left that running and then you start working on something else and you're trying to pick out the debug of something you're actually a flow you're working on, and all these are flying past, even at 1 a second, that can become quite annoying. So you can just, with this button here, just toggle to turn off that debug, which is really useful. So now, even though that flow is still running, so we can see it updating there, it's not going to continue to fill up the debug with lots of information. It just makes it a bit easier to work on multiple flows within the same tab. Right, let's make this a little bit more complicated. So let's try charting this data over time. So it's one thing to show what it is right now, but let's try making it so we can see all the values from the past minute. So I've dropped in chart, another custom node from dashboard. I'm going to double click on it. We have options within here. For instance, how long can the graph show data for? I'm going to change it to 1 minute. Things like the x-axis, so hours, minutes, second is fine for this scenario. If you're charting, say over a week or a month, you might want to add in days or dates, but that's just fine for me right now. So I'm going to press done and deploy. And what we should now get is a chart of that information. I mean, it's just a random number generator, so it's perhaps not the most fascinating data to see charted, but hopefully that demonstrates how you could pull in data and load it onto a chart. And even if you don't have this open, and if you then come back to this, so if you open this window up later or tomorrow, the information that has been passed through to the chart in that time will be visible. Unless you've restarted the Node-RED instance. There are also ways to save that data, but that's one for another time. One thing on this. This isn't particularly great to make use of this the screen real estate I have here. So you see it's more like a mobile layout. So let's fix that. So if I go back into dashboard and then go into site, I can define a width for this. Experience tells me that 300 is quite a good one to go for. Let's see how that looks. So the gauge is a fixed size. That would look rather weird if that had suddenly been stretched out, but we can see the graph now is filling up that space quite nicely and just allows you to see a little bit more detail of the data. There are lots of different ways to get data into Node-RED. For the purpose of this, I'm just using a random number generator. The data itself has been generated in Node-RED, but there are lots of ways that you can read data in from lots of different formats. So within the default palette, there's the ability to import CSVs, data out of HTML, JSON, XML, YAML, and the ability to read data out of your file system. You can also read things from third-party APIs or your own APIs. So in this example, we're just loading in data from here, but you could potentially be pulling it in from lots of other sources and displaying it on this dashboard that we're creating. Okay, so as a last example, I'm going to try and do something that's slightly more practical. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a flow which is going to graph the speed of a ping to the closest www.google.com server. So the way I'm going to do that is, first of all, I'm going to look for a custom node. Try that again. And then I'm going to search for ping. I know that this is the one I like to use, but let's just check. Let's just see what it says. So this will output, the information I need, how long it took to ping, and there's various other options. It's being used by quite a few people, 35 people in the last week. So I'm pretty sure that's good for me. So I'm now going to install that. Whilst that's installing, although it shouldn't take too long, I'm going to add in an inject node. The ping is going to provide all the payload, so I don't need anything to actually come out of that. I just need something that's going to trigger. I'm going to set that to ping. I think Google servers are pretty fast, so we'll do every second. See if that works okay. I'm then going to find the ping thing that I've just installed. Here we go. So this UI ping is the custom node that I've just added. So let's double click on that. They also think it would be a good idea to ping google.com. There's no other things I need to change here. We've got timeout, so if it doesn't respond within 5 seconds, it will give up. But that's all fine as it is. The next thing I need to do is hook it up to a chart. So I'm going to drop a new chart in there. As with before, I just need to double click on that and then press, I'll change this down to the last minute. and then just press done, and that gets rid of that red triangle. So let's have a look at this. Let's see what we see. Okay, we should be seeing a chart there. Something's not quite right. So let's go back and have a look at why, because yeah, the others are updating. So let's have a look. So I'm going to drop a debug in here because that might give me a better idea about why this data isn't appearing on this chart. So drop in a debug, wire it in, and then deploy, and then open up the debug. Okay, that's why it's not working. So this is outputting, rather than the speed of the ping response, it's outputting just that it got a response from Google. So we can't chart that. That's not really useful information. So what I need to do is, I think that this is not only passing through this true, but it's passing through some other information. It's said on the page on Node-RED website, pass through other information. So I want to look at not just the payload, but the complete message object. So I clicked on the debug and I go to complete message objects here. It's done and deploy. And what we should now see, we might want to do, right, so I've just pressed that because otherwise one of these is going to appear every second. It's going to be kind of hard to work with. So we can see now we're getting some more information. We've got the payload, which equals true, which we'd already seen. We've got the topic, it's just where we are pinging. And then we've got this timing, which I'm pretty sure is milliseconds. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, it's definitely not seconds. So this is what I want to graph, not this. So what we now need to do is to move this value time into payload. So we do that using change, as we did up here. So I'm going to drag these out a little bit to make some space. I'm going to drag in change and drop it on top. I'm going to leave that there, and then I'm going to add another debug on the other side just to check that what I've done actually works. I'm then going to go into here, and what I'm wanting to do is set message payload. So previously we just set it to be a string of text, but here we're going to set it to be another value, and the value was message.time. So now if I deploy that and clear that down, and I'll just then pause those so we can see over here, we see as I hover over this, it's showing it's this debug. We're getting all of that information, but over here, where it's going into the chart, we're just getting this numerical floating point number. So that's great. So I think now, if we go onto here, yeah, we're now getting that. So this second chart is now just showing, yeah, the last minute of how quickly google.com is responding to that ping. And I think it's can't be milliseconds. I don't know what that scale is off the top of my head. I apologize. So hopefully that's some really useful examples and things that people can build on to create their first flows. Yeah, including always look for custom nodes to do the things that you want to do, because quite often people have written amazing things that will save you so much time and actually help you build a better application than you probably would have managed to build if you started trying to work out how to code a random number generator yourself. You absolutely can code a random number generator in Node-RED. It's pretty easy, but it's nowhere near as easy as just dropping in that custom node. And you definitely won't be able to do something as slick as a dashboard. You know, it just will be a mammoth amount of work. So use custom nodes where you can. Okay, I'm going to, if I can manage my windows, drop back onto here. Okay, so how can you get started with using Node-RED? So there are a lot of different ways that you today can get your first instance of Node-RED running. Some of the most popular options are installing Node-RED on your laptop or your desktop computer, installing it on a single board computer. So I think probably a lot of you will have heard of Raspberry Pis. They're now incredibly difficult to buy. You might want to look at a different single board computer because they're in short supply. But certainly that's the first thing I ever did, was I installed Node-RED on a Raspberry Pi because I was interested in doing home automation. You can also run Node-RED in Docker, which is a containerization service or piece of software, which allows you quite easily to run a lot of instances of Node-RED on one computer or one server. You can also run Node-RED in the cloud. So yeah, there's ways to run it within services such as DigitalOcean or AWS or Google Cloud Platform. There are great guides for almost all of those ways to run things on the Node-RED website. You literally can say, oh, I want to use a Raspberry Pi, and the instructions are tailored to that particular way of getting it up and running. As I mentioned at the start, and for how I've been running through this demo, FlowForge is a great way to, if you're unsure about, or you don't have a Pi to hand, or if you're unsure about using things like Docker or installing things, FlowForge is a really great way to get an instance. It's free. You can use it for 30 days. We would be really happy if any of you want to, for you to go and make use of that. And I think that is everything from me. I will hand back over to Ian for the Q&A and give my voice a rest for a few seconds. Hi, Ian.
Yeah, grab a drink.
Oh, you're muted, Ian. Sorry, you're muted.
I shouldn't be.
Oh, you're there now. Hello.
Yeah, I'm there now. Yeah, it's good. Thank you, Rob. It's a great presentation. And I want to stress, this is Rob's first webinar ever. So I think it was pretty awesome. He did a pretty awesome job. Rob, would you mind? So I would love for you to kind of go through the palette and just show kind of all the the predefined nodes in the palette, just because I think it's one of the things about Node-RED is the breadth of what's available. There's certainly the custom nodes that are available in the marketplace, but even just in the standard palette, there's quite a bit there. So would you mind just kind of dropping back in, and just kind of quickly kind of going down through what's kind of just some of the categories, some of the highlights there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So some of the categories, sometimes it feels like it can be quite hard to group things together. Some things group together really logically, and some things you then have to have other categories. But so the common stuff is to do with triggering things, monitoring, debug. You have other additional tools to do with debug, such as catch and status. We've also got these link in and link out things, which actually are really, really useful, really easy to demonstrate. I'll just show you link in and link out. So I can have an inject and a debug like this, and then I've done it the wrong way around. Never do a live demo. 1 second, do it that way around. That, and then I can link that onto there and that. So these are as if they're linked to each other, but now I can move them apart. That's a really handy thing where you can not have wires going all over your flow. These project in and project out are a part of a FlowForge specific and allow you to link things together across projects. You've then got functions which allow you, so we've looked at switch and change. You can actually write a JavaScript function if you want to write some of your own code. Templating for laying out payloads. We've got delays and triggers. Delays allow you to say, oh, whatever message comes in, wait 5 seconds before it's pushed out, or only allow so many through in each minute. We've got networking tools. So we've got things to talk to, via MQTT, if people are aware of that. And we've also got, it's so easy to build APIs in Node-RED. I won't do it now, but I literally could do one in a minute, which allows you then to serve some information up on an API on the internet. So that's those nodes there. We've then got WebSockets as well for communicating over WebSockets. Sequence, so allows you to where you have, and yeah, I'm just going to use a bit of, so array of objects. You may have basically one payload that when broken down could be multiple payloads, and split and join allows you to receive a whole load of information and then split it down in separate messages, do something programmatically with it. Then if you want to join them back together. And then what else have we got? I think I mentioned these a little while ago. So these are really powerful for pulling in file type. So rather than you having to think, how am I going to write something that will reformat a CSV into a format that Node-RED understands? It just can pull data out of a CSV, understand the column titles, and make it available. Same for HTML, JSON, etc. Accessing the file system. So I want to save something I've created to save.txt within the file system, or read that back out. And that's the end of the stock ones. Yeah,
that's great. So have another drink while I kind of so remind people to put your questions into the Q&A chat pod. We've got a fair number of questions already, so I'll start at the top. First question was kind of how large can these flows grow? Right, is there any limit, or what's the practical limit to?
That's an interesting question. So I've never seen anyone create anything which couldn't run, but that doesn't really answer your question. Certainly the flows are dependent on the resources of the device that they are running on. So if you're running something on an earlier, Raspberry Pi in comparison to a very new laptop, you will find that the Pi will start to slow down way before the laptop does. It's not necessarily the amount of nodes you pull into a flow that dictates that. It can just be the complexity of what it's doing. Things which are talking to lots of APIs may well slow down. So I've never seen anyone create anything yet that overwhelms the system entirely. It'll be something for me to try another day. It's an interesting
one. Continuing on just about flows in general, is there a notion of abstraction for flows for reuse?
There is, absolutely, yeah. Okay, to do a demo on that, Ian, is that?
Oh, yeah.
Is that cool? Yeah. So what I can do is I'm going to do a link in and a link out. So this is something that a function here, although it's not actually going to do anything. So that could be, this could be 100 nodes, it's only one. And then I can group that selection is one way, so I can then copy and paste them around. But what I can also do is turn them into a subflow. So within this burger menu here, I can turn that into a subflow. What did I do wrong there? Create subflow. Okay, great. So that's now created this subflow here, which I can have inputs and outputs. So if I add one input and one output, and then sorry, I've built it on the main flow first. So put that here. Or in fact, I'll put the random number generator in. Makes a little bit more sense, hopefully, to everyone. So this is now something that I can reuse. If I drop back onto the flow, this is now available as a subflow, which I can just drop in, and all of the functionality within that subflow will be, when I interact with it here, will work just as if it was here. I mean, yes, the random number generator is a very simple example, but yeah, this could be a huge flow in itself.
And I'm going to put a plug in for FlowForge. Kind of with FlowForge Cloud, you can actually start to share these subflows with team members too. So kind of that's one of the kind of benefits that we think that FlowForge adds to Node-RED development. Next question: is it possible to save the debug information or data flow to a storage like Splunk or SQL?
Oh, probably, yeah. Probably. I don't think I can tell you specifically how you would do that right now. I'm just have a look at what options there are within debug. Yes, you can output it to system console. I don't. Yeah, I can't answer that one with confidence right now. I don't think it's saving it all to a file within what Node-RED is running on, because that potentially would be a negative thing. Yeah, so I don't know if perhaps, yeah, we can get your contact details. Yeah, and that's one I can come back to after, if that's okay.
Yes, Irvine, I think you asked that question, so we'll come back to you on that, kind of with the specifics. And maybe what we'll do is maybe what we can do is post the answer to the discourse and the Node-RED discourse, so everyone can see it there too, right? So, but Irvine, we'll come back specifically to it. Does dashboard work with multiple users? Does it have the concept of sessions so the users don't interfere with each other?
No. Short answer. Yeah, so multiple people can use it, but if, for instance, in the example where I was clicking the button to run this gauge, if anyone else was clicking it at the same time, I would see the updates within my interface and vice versa. So it's one of the known shortfalls of this way of deploying dashboards. There are other projects within Node-RED for deploying dashboards. They may have addressed that. I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Let me just understand. So multiple people can actually view a dashboard. Yeah. And the data on the dashboard. You're saying multiple people can't interact with the dashboard?
So they can interact with it. And yeah, so what actually occurred to me is this URL is publicly available. So anyone actually, if you want to go on there,
but put it in the chat. Let's put it in the chat.
Denial of service, anything. Yeah.
Put it in the chat. Let's
I don't know. For me, it says I'm chatting to host and panelists. It doesn't come up with an option
If
for
you
everyone.
go under the two, there's a down arrow, kind of, you can switch it over to everyone.
Yeah. It just says the only other option is you, Ian.
Cool. Just send
I'll
it.
send it. I've sent it to you, and then perhaps if you could post that on, that would be great. So when everyone, please don't go and like try and write something that hits this button 1,000 times a second. We'd appreciate. But anyone who now follows that link when Ian's posted it will be seeing the same updates as me. And anyone who, I think someone just clicked it. I just saw it jump more than once in a second.
Yeah.
So you do have this problem. There we go. Thank you, everyone. Lovely. You do have this problem though of our interactions are all layering on top of each other. So yeah, like for instance, if that was a submission form, that might not be that useful, unfortunately.
Okay, cool. All right, on to the next question. Is there a way to comment out some parts of nodes while building the program?
So you would just run a wire past them, and sorry if I'm, seeing that as perhaps something, simpler solution than a simpler question. So that has basically commented out that subflow. So, and then whenever I want to put it back in, I would put there. You can also add comments, but I don't think that's what you mean, understanding, from a programming. So you can, have comments on things, but yeah, that's for labeling. So the way to, if you want to skip out something, would be to run a wire directly. And you could just leave it like that, actually, and that's fine because this information is going to get passed straight through to debug.
All right. Is there any review and validation of custom nodes for custom nodes? How can you tell good ones from less good ones? Yeah,
it's a great question. So it's something that I was listening to some of my colleagues, including Nick O'Leary, talk about a little while ago, and the efforts that's been made to try and help people. I think with any package manager where, there is always the risk of, using something which isn't great, hopefully not malicious, but that's still a possibility. Some good things to look for are, so if I go back into the palette manager and I'm just going to search for MySQL, just as an example. So I would be looking, for instance, for something that's been updated regularly. It's quite a positive indicator. It's not always perfect, but if a lot of people are updating, it may well be that it's still being developed and also scrutinized as it goes through the development process. If you click through to view that, one thing to look at is this scorecard, and this is what Nick and my other colleagues were talking about, which is a way to try and understand. Well, let's have a look. So the licensing, there's something not quite right with the package name, apparently. It's not saying which versions of Node-RED are supported. So this system, the idea was to try and give people indicators as to which custom nodes are good to use or not. Recommendation is really good, but that's only if you're working within, a community of people who are using Node-RED. Perhaps if you're unsure, maybe go and go on the Node-RED Discord. I'll get it right. Discourse. Always get those two mixed up. Yeah, and ask people on there. Another thing that I would often do is just try a few different ones. So in a test project, drop in a few different ones and test the functionality yourself and see which one seems to be the best fit.
And actually, there's a follow-up question. Kind of, is there? Do we count the number of installs, or any way to see the number of installs? Can you go back to your screen?
Yeah.
The flow.
Yeah.
Yeah. There. So, so there is the number of downloads in the last week. Right.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. I think there may be some ways for people to opt out of that, but I think that these numbers seem to correlate very well to what are the most popular custom nodes. And I think, as I was saying, dashboard was it about 29,000, I think, in the past week, for instance, downloads.
Okay. Next question. I'm not sure if you can answer this quickly or not, because we only have 5 minutes left. Could you show how you could pick up a temperature reading from a sensor in the home? Example, Ulink. I've never heard of actually Ulink, but I'm not a home automation person. So
Yeah, I mean, the real, well, not even that much of a challenge, but the bit to be demonstrated in there would be how you would interface between Node-RED and that particular piece of smart home technology. And they are all different. I'm not familiar with the particular one you mentioned, but for instance, I use TP-Link smart plugs. So I use this one here, and I'm just going to install that. What this allows you to do, so the smart plugs I've got allow you can see how much power is being used by sockets, as well as turn them on and off programmatically. So it's really good for when we're all concerned about electricity bills and heating and whatnot. I can monitor, for instance, how much power all of my radiators are using. So, but when this loads in and a watched custom node never loads, this will hopefully give you some ideas about the options. Here we go, it's just appeared. Okay, so it's this one down here. So if we go into this, I'm going to open up this as well. So in this particular case, all I would need to, and there aren't any on the network I'm on right here, but so these devices have an IP address. So let's say it was 10.0.0.2. And then I would just press done, and I could then communicate with that device with an inject and a debug. If we look in, this is going to tell me the functions which are available. So for instance, down here, if I send message payload of true, it will turn it on, false, turn it off. And then we can also send get info, and that will, or get metered info, and that will pull the power usage. So what you will probably find, and yeah, as I say, I'm not familiar with the particular item you mentioned, is that if it's popular, someone's already built a custom node to deal with it. So yeah, you don't have to write that yourselves. It's usually pretty easy.
And my guess is if it has an API, like an HTTP API too, you could use the API node to capture.
You absolutely can. That will, yeah. I mean, it's then if you're having to do that because the particular smart equipment manufacturer tries to hide their APIs, then that can become a lot more involved. Wherever possible, use the off-the-peg ones, because for things like, like vacuum cleaners or lighting systems, heating systems, they're quite often is just something that's ready to go. That will be your path of least resistance if it's there.
Yeah, we're going to try and get two more in. So thanks, Rob. I just blinked when you made the dashboard as wide as the screen. Can you quickly show how to grow and shrink the dashboard for a cell or disparate layout?
So in this sidebar here, we've got this section for dashboard, which has got various different ways you can change it. One thing I did was move things up and down, but the specific thing you're asking about here is this spacing one, so 1.1 times 1 widget size. So if I change that to 150 and deploy, I perhaps should have already had it open. Is it going to do it? What did I do wrong?
Did I hit deploy?
Wrong? I think I did. Did I? I didn't. Oh, I did. Oh, whatever. I've broken something. I don't know what I've broken. I've broken something. I was doing so well. I got 1 minute from the end without breaking anything. So I can't deploy, and I don't know why. So I might have to. But yes, to answer the question, just change that number and press deploy, and that always works fine. And then your dashboard would reduce in size. Or please, people in the chat, tell me what I've broken if you've noticed something.
And I guess the last one is, how does this compare to Grafana? So the dashboard technology to Grafana. I'm going to try and answer that, and you can certainly add to it if you want. But I think, so I'm no Grafana expert, but I think one of the knocks I hear about Grafana, it's really just visualization. You can't actually add kind of buttons and triggers to a Grafana dashboard. Is my understanding. I might be wrong there, but that's what I've heard. Right, and I think kind of with the Node-RED dashboard nodes, right, is you can create much more interactive user experience for your dashboard. So I think that would be at the high level how I would compare it. So
yeah, and the only thing I'd add to that is I think Grafana will probably give you much prettier, much more slick looking interfaces, then you will probably get, you can make dashboards look really good, but you need to start, you're not just going to do it from simple option menus. You really need to start thinking about the design. So I think Grafana is better for that in the first instance.
Yeah. So, all right. I'm sorry we did not get to all the questions. What we'll try and do is we'll try and go through them, and actually, I think Rob, maybe we'll have to kind of work out, but ideally, what we'll do is we'll answer them in the discourse forums, the Node-RED discourse forums, so everyone see them, and then we'll try and send you an email to kind of if we do, or if we're able to get to your question. All right. So when we finish the webinar, you're going to be asked a survey. Please take your time just to give us quick feedback on the webinar. I would like to point out that, so we'll send you a link to the recording, probably sometime tomorrow once we get it posted. We are doing another Ask Me Anything session on March 9th. So if you have some more ad hoc questions about Node-RED, Nick O'Leary and Rob Marcer are going to do that. And near the end of March, I think it's March 30th, we're going to be doing an introduction to FlowForge for people, but we'll be sending out reminders to both those events. But thank you again, Rob. Well done. Thank you for everyone for attending. And please feel free to reach out to Rob and myself if you have any questions, or if we can help you with anything. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.